guys, my name is Pixie and this is the super advanced Firebase tutorial. Before we begin, you need to be aware that this is not a tutorial for beginner users. Firebase is an advanced component, but more specifically, this video combines a few older tutorials into one concept. Before you watch this tutorial, make sure you're familiar with the push notification, TinyDB, AdMob, and RewardedVideo components. I'll leave that up to you if you feel confident enough to continue, or if you need to go back and watch those videos really quickly. There should be an information card that pops up right here with links to those videos. If not, you can check the video description or you'll see the links pop up at the end of this video. All right, so let's get started. Head on over to Firebase and you should remember this website from the push notifications tutorial. Click on Go to Console. You can create a brand new project if you want. I'm going to use the same project that we used in the push notifications tutorial. Then click on Database to get started. If you followed along with the push notifications tutorial, you should have a hierarchy that looks like this. If you're using a brand new project, obviously you won't see anything except your project name, your specific URL, and your project ID. Let's head to the rules section and change the right option to true. Now, keep in mind that doing so will make your database public. Anyone who has access to your project URL will have access to your database, so this project is not secure. Granted, the only way they'd have access to your project URL is if you gave it to them. You can read more about the Firebase rules in their documentation, and I'll link the URL to this page in the description. And I'll also recommend looking around the community for a Firebase extension that you might be interested in if you're worried about security. We're not going to hard code any data into this database, but go ahead and leave Firebase open and let's head on over to AppyBuilder. In Design View for Screen 1, change the horizontal alignment to center, set the background image. I'm going to hide the status bar, set sizing to responsive, and also hide the title bar. Add a vertical arrangement to the screen called top. Set alignments to center center. Height is 195 pixels, width is fill parent, and we'll also give this a pretty background image. Drop a label inside this layout component and call it label username. You can style this however you want. I'm going to change the font size to 40, give it a custom font face. The text actually doesn't matter. You'll never see the default text. Change the alignment to center and the color to white. Add a table arrangement below top. Let's call it sign up. Keep the defaults for this table, just change the width to fill parent. Inside this table, add 2 buttons in the first row and 2 images in the second row. We'll call these button sign in, button sign up, image sign in, and image sign up. The first and second buttons will be styled exactly the same. I'll change the font size to 20, give it a custom font face. Height is 60 pixels, width is 50%. It has a background image and the text will say sign in. I'll add the exact same style to the second button, but the text will obviously say sign up instead of sign in. These next 2 images are purely aesthetic. I'm just using them to simulate switching tabs. Keep the defaults for image sign in, but change the picture to background arrow.png. Same thing for image sign up. Keep the defaults, but change the picture to background no arrow.png. When the user clicks on the sign in button, the arrow image will be below the sign in button and vice versa. Underneath the sign up section, add a vertical arrangement and call it middle. Before we add components to this section, click on Screen 1 and select the scrollable option because we're running out of design room here. Click back on Middle, set the alignments to center center, width and height are set to fill parent, and we can also set the background color to none. Okay, so now we're going to drop components in this order. We need an image, a label, and another image. Add a horizontal arrangement below image 2. Place an image and a text box inside of the horizontal arrangement. Make sure that the image is on the left side of the text box. Below the horizontal arrangement, add another image, and below that image, add another horizontal arrangement. Place an image and a text box inside of the second horizontal arrangement. Finish this section off with another image, a button, and then an image. Take a look at what we've done really quickly. There's an image component in between every major component in our design. We're going to use these images as padding. Let's start with the first image. Call it P0 and set its picture to invisible.png. Click on image 2, call it P1 and set its picture to invisible.png. Then click on image 4, change its name to P2 and set its picture to invisible.png. Continue this pattern for the remaining padding images. When you're done, you should have 5 padding images named P0 through P4. Recall from previous tutorials that the invisible image is 10 by 10 pixels, so we automatically have 10 pixels of padding in between each of these components. But you can always change the height to whatever you want if you feel like you need extra padding in certain areas. Okay, let's get started with the first label. Call this label error and style it however you want. I'm going to make the font size just a tad bigger. Make sure you delete the text field because we don't want to see this label when the app starts. Change the text alignment to center and change the color to white. Let's call this first horizontal arrangement container username. Change the vertical alignment to center. Keep the height at automatic, but change the width to, let's say, 70%. This container has its own background. It kind of looks invisible at first glance, but when we run the app, you'll see it looks like an underline. Call the second horizontal arrangement container password. Style this container the exact same way. Vertical alignment is center, width is 70%, and we're using the same background image. Select image 3 and rename it to icon username. We can keep the defaults for this image, just change the picture to iconusername.png. Next, click on image 5 and do the same thing. We'll call this one icon password, keep the defaults, but change the picture to iconpassword.png. Next, click on text box 1, change the name to user input username. You can style this text box however you want, but there are 2 things you should have on this text box. You absolutely want the hint to say username, and the background color for this design should be set to none. Click on text box 2 and do the same thing. Call it user input password, style it however you want, but you definitely want the hint to say password, and the background color should be none for this design. Keep in mind that for a real login screen, you'll want to use the password text box component. I'm just using a normal text box for this example. Next, click on button 1 and rename it to button confirm. I'm going to keep the font size at 14, but change the font face and set the image to backgroundbutton.png. We could change the text on this button dynamically, but I'm not even going to worry about it. Just type in a general phrase like confirm and change the text color to white. And there we go, we've made a very simple login screen. In the storage section, add a Firebase and TinyDB component to the screen. Then add a clock component. Don't worry about renaming these non-visible components unless you want to, but I will rename the clock component to timestamp. For this tutorial, I'm keeping the timer always fires and timer enabled options checked. So basically this clock is always going to be running. In your project, you can decide if you want to turn it off and on when you need it. I'll leave that up to you. Make sure the timer interval is set to 0. TinyDB doesn't have any default properties, so don't worry about that component. Click on your Firebase component. Your project bucket should be filled out automatically with the name of your AppyBuilder project. I'm going to keep the project bucket as Firebase tutorial. If you watched the push notification tutorial, you should already know where to find your Firebase URL, but you'll also need a Firebase token. Just to recap, you'll find your project's URL here. Click on the cog icon next to Project Overview and open your project settings. You'll find your API key here. This API key is your Firebase token. It's very important that you understand not to share your Firebase URL or Firebase token. Honestly, you just need the URL and people can mess with your database. The only reason why I'm making this information public to you guys is so you can see what it looks like. As soon as I'm done making this tutorial, I will be changing the rules for this database to read only. You should be using your own Firebase project, which should have your project URL and your API key. Before we move on, click on screen 1 and make sure you uncheck the scrollable option. We were just using that option to design this screen. We're done with screen 1. Let's create a new screen called points. On the point screen, I'm not going to worry about making a fancy design here, so I'm going to speed up this footage. The purpose of this screen is just to output some data from Firebase, just something you can play around with. This banner ad, like the banner on screen 1, is just here to take up space. Don't even worry about it. There are some components you do need on this screen in order for the blocks to work. You will need a rewarded video component. If you're not familiar with the rewarded video component, I have made a quick tutorial on it in the past. We're not covering the extra components in this tutorial because they've been covered in previous videos. You will also need a Firebase component and a TinyDB component. You're going to use the exact same properties from your Firebase component that you used on screen 1, So you should have your own token, your own URL, and a name for your project bucket. Make sure you also have a label for username, a label for user ID, a label for coins, and a button. If you download this project from the AppyBuilder Community, you'll have access to this AIA file, and you can download the images that I've made for this tutorial directly from the media folder. So that should do it for our design. You can make the screen prettier later. Just make sure you have at least 3 labels, a button, as well as the RewardedVideo, Firebase, and TinyDB components. Let's head over to the blocks editor for screen 1. Start with 9 global variables. The first 3 variables will be custom colors. I'll name these color light purple, color dark purple, and color light gray. Feel free to use these colors, make your own colors, or you can choose not to use them at all, in which case you only need 6 variables. The next 6 variables are called table users, user ID, field user ID, field username, field password, and status. A typical database is set up almost like a spreadsheet. So I'm going to open up Microsoft Excel and just show you really quickly what I mean. Let's say this Excel file is called users. The first column is the user ID, the second column is the username, and the third column is the password. And we can keep adding columns that make sense to this user table, like email, avatar, points, level, etc. Each user has a unique ID that identifies that user, and anytime we want information about that user, we need to get the user's ID. Firebase is set up a little differently, and honestly, it can get kind of messy. As you saw with the push notification tutorial, the data in Firebase is set up as a hierarchy. We have one table called users, and in that table we'll have however many unique user IDs, and each user ID will have a username, password, and points field. So we need to create these global variables for the fields that we want to access in Firebase that are specific to our user. These will be string variables except for user ID. We can set its default to 0 using a math block. All of these should be blank except table users, which we'll define as users. Make sure you include the / at the end of users. If you decided to use special colors while you're following along, let's make an optional procedure called initialize theme. In a future tutorial, I will show you guys how to create different themes, but this one is going to be super easy cheesy. I'm going to change the text color of both text boxes and the confirm button to be light purple. The next procedure is called initialize tags. In this procedure, we'll define the global variables for our user table. Let's start with global user ID. This is the only variable we need to get from the TinyDB component. The value of user ID will be a 13-digit number that we'll define later. Set field user ID to join table users with user ID. Then set field username to join field user ID with the words /username. Make sure to include the / before the word username. You can copy and paste this block for field password and of course change username to password. Create a procedure called sign in. Set global status to login. I want to change the text color of the appropriate button to dark purple and the other button to light gray. So in this case, the button we're focusing on, as you can guess, is the sign in button. Our sign in procedure for this tutorial is going to be super simple. If the user already has an account, they will only need to enter their password. So if they're signing in, we'll hide the username container. Underneath the sign in and sign up buttons were 2 corresponding images, and we'll use those images to simulate tabs. So we want the arrow image to appear below the sign in button in this case. We're also going to display the username during sign in, so we need to get the username from Firebase. If there is no username for this user in Firebase, let's output something simple like error. Lastly, for this procedure, set label errors text to blank. Copy and paste this procedure and change the name to sign up. Set global status to add. All I'm going to do is flip-flop these blocks. The sign up button should have the dark purple text, the username container should be visible, and the arrow image should display below the sign up button. Delete the firebase.getValue request and replace it with label username.text equals new user. Our next procedure is super easy. We're only asking our user to log in with their password, so to verify the login credentials, we'll need to request the user's password from Firebase. Our final procedure is going to add a user to our Firebase. Start with 5 local variables. Call these timestamp, directory, username, password, and points. We made global variables for username and password, but in this procedure, those values will not exist because this is a brand new user, so we need to create those values. We added a clock to the design and set its interval to 0, so this clock is constantly running. Our timestamp variable will grab the system time from our clock the second the user clicks on the confirm button. So we're stamping that time down to the millisecond. This timestamp will be the user's ID. It is probably the easiest way to generate a unique ID using Firebase and AppyBuilder. The chances of multiple people trying to create an account on your app at the exact same time down to the millisecond are like 1,000,000,000 to 1. However, you might still want to consider checking to make sure that timestamp doesn't exist in your Firebase, and we'll set that as one of your challenges for this video. The next 4 local variables can default to a blank text box. We'll need to set their values below. Set directory to join table users with our timestamp. This is just like field user ID from our global variables. Set username to join directory with /username, and do the same for /password and /points. Before we can create a new user, we need to make sure the user filled out both text boxes, otherwise we're going to get blank values in our Firebase. If either one or both of the text boxes for username and password are blank, let's set label error to something like please fill out all fields. Otherwise, we can store those values in our Firebase. Let's add username, password, and points. We'll take username directly from the username text box, and we'll take password directly from the password text box, and we'll set points to 0. Next, we need to store our user ID and our TinyDB using our timestamp. And once we've successfully added our new user, we can send them to the point screen. Our procedures are now done, so let's make them work. When the screen starts, we need to initialize our theme and our tags. We're checking to see if user ID exists in our TinyDB. If there is no user ID in our TinyDB, then we'll ask the user to sign up. Otherwise, if we have a user ID, we'll ask the user to sign in. Grab the click events for button sign in and button sign up and apply the same procedures. Super easy, right? We can specify what the confirm button will do by comparing the status text. If global status is set to login, then we'll call the check login procedure. Otherwise, if global status is set to add, then we'll call the add user procedure. The Firebase component has 5 built-in events, and you can play around with these, but for this tutorial, we'll just need the got value event. Notice that we made 2 calls to Firebase. We're trying to get the username and get the password, but we only have this one event to do that. We need this event to do different things each time we call it. We can specify what that is by checking the tag when we request this event. In this example, when the user is logging in, we want to display their username at the top of the screen. So the value that we're getting from this event is associated with the username tag. When we request the password in this example, it's because we're trying to see if the user entered the correct password to log in. In this case, value is associated with the password tag. If the user entered the correct password, then we can take them straight to the point screen. Otherwise, let's output to the error label that login failed. This screen is done. Let's add some blocks to the point screen. Create 6 local variables on this screen. We'll need a variable for the table users, user ID, field user ID, field username, and field points. We won't need the password on this screen. The last variable will be called amount. We'll be referencing the same user table on this screen. User ID should be set to 0. The field should be blank text blocks, and amount should be set to 0 by default. Create another initialize tags procedure. You can actually probably copy and paste the procedure from screen 1 to the point screen, and just change field password to field points. We'll also set label user ID to global user ID in this procedure. This will output our user's unique ID so we can see it on this screen. When we start the screen, let's load and add into our rewarded video component so that it's ready to go when we push the button. Then initialize the tags we need for this screen. We're also going to need to request the username and points from Firebase. If the username does not exist in Firebase, that means something went wrong, so let's output the word user. We'll do the same with the point request. This should be an arbitrary number that would be impossible for the user to have, something like 0.123. This will let us know that clearly we've got an error somewhere around here. Maybe we need to check the name of our project bucket or our table, check to make sure your tags are initialized properly, check your TinyDB. The goal is to not see the word user and not see the number 0.123. If the user clicks on the plus button, this will show our rewarded video. Once the ad has closed, we can load another ad to prepare it in case the user clicks on the plus button again. This will hopefully cut down on some of the delay in viewing an ad. We can grab the username and points from Firebase just like we did on screen 1 using the getValue event. If we're requesting the username, let's output that username to label username. If we're requesting the points field from Firebase, we'll set global amount to global amount plus value. We can store that new global amount in the point field in our Firebase, and we'll update label coins with global amount. To get the amount, we need to use the RewardedVideo.rewarded event. This one is super easy. Just set global amount to amount. Then get the point field from Firebase. If that field does not exist in Firebase, give the value an arbitrary number. I'm going to change the value to 0.125 just so I know that error is coming from here versus coming from here. Let's run the app and see this in action so you can get a clearer picture of the flow of these blocks. The app starts and we see that our username is set to new user. The sign up button is highlighted with the dark purple text and the arrow appears below the sign up button. We can see the username and password text boxes. We're seeing the sign up section because there's no user ID in our TinyDB. If we click on sign in, notice that the username text box disappears, sign in is highlighted, and we see error at the top because again, there's no user ID in the TinyDB, so we can't sign into an account that doesn't exist. So let's create a new account. First off, press the confirm button without entering anything in the text box and you should see the error message that you need to fill out all fields. Now I'll create a user called Pixie and my password is bomb. Keep in mind that you should use a password text box for this field, but I'm using a regular text box for this tutorial so we can make sure that the password check is working properly. Hit confirm and you should be taken straight to the point screen. The point screen says, "Hello Pixie," displays my user ID and shows that I have 0 points. In Firebase, you'll see that your data has been added. Firebase tutorial is the name of the project bucket. We have a users table, a unique ID, password is bomb, points are set to 0, and username is Pixie. Notice that the data we entered during the push notification tutorial looks normal. That's because we hard-coded this data directly into Firebase, whereas we placed this data into Firebase from an outside source. So I think this is just string formatting, but don't mess with it. As you can see, the data still outputs properly. The next user that gets added to this Firebase will look something like this. We still only have one entry for the project bucket. We're still only using the users table, but we have a new user ID, and that user ID has 3 more fields for password, points, and username. Next, I'm going to click on the plus icon, which brings up an advertisement that I can watch. I'm going to watch the entire ad, and as soon as it closes, I've got 100 points. The amount you receive is based off of your specific settings for your rewarded video component. In this case, I've set the reward amount to 100. Check Firebase and notice that our points have been updated to 100. Click the plus icon again, watch the ad, then close the ad, and I've got another 100 points for a total of 200. And Firebase has also been updated to 200 points. Now close the app completely and open it back up again. This time we're seeing the sign in screen. My username is displayed at the top and only the password text is visible. I can still create a new user if I want to, but my phone will only remember one user ID. Both user IDs will be added to Firebase, but if I make a new user, the old user ID will be rewritten to the new user ID. So let's try logging in. Type in any password that you know is incorrect, and you should see the error message that login failed. This time, type in the correct password and you should be taken straight to the point screen where you'll see that you still have 200 points. And that about does it for this tutorial. Good job, guys. We are done. So don't forget to check out the AppyBuilder community where you'll find more tips and tutorials. If you have any questions about projects that you're working on, you can always ask community members to help you out. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to comment below, subscribe, and thumbs up the video. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye!